The hall was packed with hundreds of people, and the air was thick with heat and noise. Elara Voss stood near the back, her hands shaking, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Tonight was the choosing ceremony, the night every unmated Omega in the kingdom of Vaymor walked forward and knelt before the man fate had chosen for her. Elara did not want to be here. She had never wanted any of this. But her stepmother, Della, had pushed her through the crowd with a grip so tight it left marks on her arm. "You will kneel before Prince Kael," Della hissed into her ear. "Do you understand me? The king's brother, not some low soldier, not some farmer, the prince. This is your only chance to lift this family out of nothing." Elara did not answer. She rarely answered Della anymore. Since her father died 3 years ago, arguing only made things worse. She kept her eyes down and let herself be pushed forward through the crowd of nervous young women, all dressed in white, all trembling the same way she was. At the front of the hall, on a raised platform, sat 2 men. One was younger, with soft eyes and a gentle smile that put people at ease. That was Kael, the king's brother. Beside him sat a much larger man, broad-shouldered, with a stone-cold expression and eyes the color of storm clouds. That was Ronan Thorn, Alpha King of Vaymor. Everyone feared him. Even the guards would not meet his gaze for too long. The ceremony worked in a strange and old way. Each Omega would walk forward, and something inside her would pull her toward her true fated match, like a string tied around her heart. Most women barely had to think about it. Their feet simply moved. Elara had heard that the pull was impossible to fight and impossible to fake. When her turn came, her legs felt like water. The crowd noise faded into a dull hum in her ears. She stepped forward, trying to focus on Kael's kind face, trying to will her feet to carry her only to him. But halfway across the floor, the noise around her grew louder. Someone bumped into her, and in the chaos, her foot caught on the hem of her dress. She stumbled, lost her balance for one terrible second, and by the time she caught herself, she was standing in front of the wrong man. Ronan Thorn looked down at her, confused for a heartbeat, and then his eyes narrowed. "Get up," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You are in the wrong place." Elara's face burned with shame. She tried to step back, tried to move toward Kael, who was only a few feet away, but it was too late. Her knees had already bent. Some old magic older than her fear had already taken hold, and before she understood what was happening, a golden light burst from her chest and wrapped around her wrist, like a bracelet made of fire. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The golden light spread from her wrist and shot straight to Ronan's chest, where a matching mark bloomed beneath his shirt, glowing bright enough to be seen even through the fabric. The whole hall fell silent. Even the musicians stopped playing. Ronan shot up from his seat so fast, the chair toppled behind him. "No," he said, staring at his own chest, where the light pulsed like a heartbeat. "This is a mistake." But the golden light did not care whether it was a mistake. It settled, dimmed to a soft glow, and then vanished beneath their skin, leaving behind a mark shaped like 2 crescent moons pressed together. The bond was complete. Whatever had just happened between them could not be undone by wishing it away. Elara stared at her own wrist in horror. She looked up at Ronan, whose face had gone pale with fury, and then past him to Kael, who sat frozen, his kind eyes wide with shock. Della, somewhere in the crowd, let out a strangled cry that was somewhere between rage and disbelief. "There has been an error," Elara said quickly, her voice trembling. "Your Grace, I swear to you, I meant no disrespect. I was aiming for the prince. I stumbled. This was never meant to happen." Ronan did not answer her. He turned instead to the elder standing near the platform, an old woman named Marin who oversaw every choosing ceremony in the kingdom. "Fix this," he said. "Now." Marin's face was grim. She stepped closer, examining the mark on Elara's wrist, then the one glowing faintly through Ronan's shirt. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "the bond has already sealed itself. This is not something that can be undone in a moment. Breaking a completed bond is dangerous. It can bring illness, even death, to one or both parties." "I do not accept that answer," Ronan said, his voice hard as iron. "With respect," Marin replied, "the bond does not care what you accept." The crowd began to murmur, hundreds of voices rising and falling like waves. Elara felt every eye in the room on her, felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. She was nobody, the daughter of a healer, with no pack standing, no noble blood, nothing that would make her a fitting match for a king. And now, because of one clumsy step, she was bound to the most powerful and most feared man in the kingdom. Chaol rose from his seat slowly. He walked to where Alara stood and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. Not anger, not quite sadness either. Something more complicated. "It seems fate had other plans for tonight," he said quietly, though his voice carried just enough for those nearby to hear. "I am so sorry," Alara whispered to him. "I never meant for this to happen." "I believe you," Chaol said, and there was something gentle in the way he said it, something that made her feel, for just a moment, less alone, in the middle of all these staring faces. Ronan's guards moved closer to the platform, forming a loose half-circle around their king, as if expecting trouble. Ronan looked at Alara, the way a man might look at an unwelcome storm cloud on the horizon, something that had appeared out of nowhere and threatened to ruin everything he had built. "Take her to the East Tower," he said to his guards. "Under watch. No one leaves, no one enters, until I decide what to do about this." "You cannot lock her away like a prisoner," Chaol said, stepping between his brother and the guards. "She has done nothing wrong. It was an accident." "An accident that has bound the crown to a stranger with no name and no standing," Ronan snapped. "Do you understand what this means? Every rival pack in this kingdom will hear of it by morning. They will see weakness. They will see a king who could not even control something as simple as a ceremony." "Then perhaps," Chaol said quietly, "you should worry less about how it looks, and more about the fact that a frightened young woman is standing in front of you, shaking." For the first time, Ronan looked directly at Alara again, really looked at her, and something flickered behind his stormy eyes. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the same cold mask he always wore. "Take her to the tower," he repeated, and this time, no one argued. The guards stepped forward, and Alara felt hands close gently but firmly around her arms. She looked back once at the crowd, searching for Della, but her stepmother had already turned away, her face twisted with something between fury and calculation, as if she were already trying to think of a way to use this disaster to her advantage. As the guards led Alara out of the hall, whispers followed her like a cold wind. She heard fragments of conversation, some cruel, some curious. The healer's daughter. No family, no name. How could the bond choose her? Poor girl. She will not last a season in that castle. She kept her chin up, despite the burning in her eyes, refusing to let anyone see her cry. Her mother, before she died, had once told her that dignity was the one thing no one could take away unless you handed it to them yourself. Alara held on to those words now, like a rope in a storm. The East Tower was cold, and mostly empty, its stone walls bare, except for a single tapestry depicting an old battle no one remembered the name of anymore. The guards left her in a modest room with a narrow bed, a small window, and a door that she heard lock from the outside the moment they left. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the golden mark on her wrist, tracing the shape of the 2 crescent moons with her fingertip. She thought about her father, who had spent his whole life teaching her how to heal wounds, how to mix herbs for fever, how to stitch a cut without leaving too much of a scar. He had never wanted her to be near the castle, near politics, near kings. He had wanted a quiet life for her, safe and simple. Now she was locked in a tower, bonded against her will to the most powerful man in the land, and she had no idea what would happen to her next. Somewhere far below, in another part of the castle, Ronan Thorne stood alone in his private chamber, staring at the mark glowing faintly beneath his shirt. He pressed his palm against his chest, as if he could push it away, erase it, make it disappear through sheer force of will. It did not fade. It pulsed, steadily, warm against his skin, a permanent reminder of a mistake he had never asked for, and could not undo. He thought of his father, and the way his father's mate had been used as a weapon by enemies who wanted to break him. He thought of the years he had spent building walls around himself, refusing every match his advisors suggested, refusing to give anyone the power to hurt him through someone he loved. And now, because of one clumsy step during a ceremony he barely paid attention to, all of that careful protection had been shattered in an instant. "Find every physician in this kingdom," he told his personal guard, a tall, quiet man named Garrick, who had served him since childhood. I want to know if there is any way to break a completed bond without killing either party. I do not care how long it takes, or how much it costs. Garrick hesitated. And if there is no way, Your Grace? Ronan's jaw tightened. Then we will find one anyway. Garrick bowed and left to carry out the order, though something in his expression suggested he doubted the search would end the way his king hoped. Ronan turned back to the window, looking out over the dark courtyard toward the east tower, where a single small light flickered in a narrow window. He did not know why his eyes kept drifting toward that light, or why something in his chest tightened every time he thought about the frightened young woman locked inside that room. He told himself it was only anger, only frustration at a plan disrupted, a careful life interrupted by chance. He told himself the tightness in his chest had nothing to do with her at all, and everything to do with the danger this accidental bond now posed to his kingdom. But as the night wore on, and the golden mark on his chest continued its steady, quiet glow, Ronan Thorne found it harder and harder to believe his own excuses. Something had changed the moment that mark appeared, whether he wanted it to or not, and no matter how many physicians he summoned, or how many walls he tried to rebuild, some part of him already understood that this was not a mistake that could simply be erased. Far above him, in the small stone room at the top of the east tower, Ilara finally allowed herself to cry, quietly, into the thin blanket covering her bed. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, whether she would be sent away in shame, punished for a mistake she never meant to make, or forced to remain bonded to a man who clearly despised the very idea of her existence. All she knew, as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, was that her old life, the quiet, simple life her father had wanted for her, was gone forever. Whatever came next, there was no going back to who she had been, before she stumbled in that crowded hall and knelt in front of the wrong brother. The morning would bring new questions, new dangers, and a kingdom already whispering her name with suspicion. But for tonight, in the silence of the tower, Ilara Voss allowed herself one small mercy. She let herself rest, even for just a few hours, before whatever fate had planned for her began to unfold in earnest. Morning light spilled through the narrow window of the tower room, waking Ilara from a sleep that had not brought much rest. Her body ached from the stiff bed, and her mind still buzzed with the memory of the night before, the golden light, the gasps of the crowd, the cold fury on the king's face. She sat up slowly and looked at the mark on her wrist. It was still there, pale gold against her skin, unmistakably real. The door unlocked with a heavy click, and a servant girl entered carrying a tray of bread, fruit, and water. She was young, maybe a year or two older than Ilara, with kind eyes but a nervous manner, as if she were not sure whether it was safe to be seen helping the woman everyone in the castle was already talking about. "My name is Fenna," the girl said quietly, setting the tray down. "I was told to bring you food and to help you dress. The king has requested your presence in the throne room within the hour." Ilara's stomach twisted. "Do you know what he wants?" Fenna shook her head. "No one tells me anything, but the whole castle is talking about you. Some say you tricked your way into the bond to gain power. Others say the goddess herself chose you, and no one can question that." She paused, glancing at the door as if worried someone might be listening. "For what it's worth, I don't think you look like someone plotting to steal a throne." Despite everything, Ilara managed a small, tired smile. "Thank you. I promise you, I never planned any of this." Fenna helped her into a simple blue dress, far plainer than anything a queen might wear, but clean and well made. As she worked the laces at the back, she spoke quietly. "The king has not slept, they say. He paced his study half the night, calling for physicians and old scholars. He wants to know if the bond can be broken." Ilara felt something sharp twist in her chest at those words, though she could not fully explain why. Of course he wanted to break it. She was nothing to him, an accident, an inconvenience standing between him and the life he had planned. She told herself it should not hurt to hear it confirmed. It hurt anyway. When Fenna finished dressing her, 2 guards arrived to escort Ilara down through the winding stone stairs of the tower and across the courtyard toward the main castle. She kept her eyes forward, ignoring the servants who paused their work to stare, ignoring the whispers that followed her like a trail of smoke. She would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. The throne room was smaller than she expected, though grand in its own way, with tall windows letting in streams of morning light, and banners bearing the Thorn family crest hanging along the stone walls. Ronan sat on the throne, dressed now in dark formal clothing, his expression unreadable. Kale stood to one side, arms crossed, watching quietly. A handful of advisors and physicians clustered near the base of the throne, murmuring among themselves. "Bring her forward," Ronan said, his voice carrying easily across the room. Alara walked forward and stopped a respectful distance from the throne, lowering her eyes briefly out of habit before lifting them again. She refused to spend the rest of her life staring at the floor. "The physicians have examined the histories," Ronan said without preamble. "There is no recorded case of a completed bond being broken without serious harm to one or both parties. Some records suggest death, others suggest permanent illness, weakness that never fully heals." He paused, his jaw tight. "In other words, we are stuck with each other, at least for now." "I never wanted this bond, Your Grace," Alara said carefully. "I understand it is unwelcome. If there is anything I can do to make this easier for you, I am willing to hear it." Something flickered across Ronan's face, surprise perhaps, at her calm response. He had expected tears, or pleading, or perhaps anger. Instead, she stood there, steady, offering cooperation instead of complaint. "You will remain in the castle," he said finally. "Under guard, for your own safety as much as anything else. Word of the bond has already spread. There are those who would use you against me, and others who might see you as a target simply for existing. Until we understand the full situation, you do not leave these walls." "So I am a prisoner," Alara said quietly. "You are protected," Ronan corrected, though his tone suggested he understood the difference was thin. Kale stepped forward then, his voice gentler than his brother's. "It would help if you had some occupation here, something useful to do, rather than sitting idle in a tower. I understand you have skill in healing." Alara nodded. "My father was a healer. I learned from him since I was a child." "Then perhaps you could assist in the castle infirmary," Kale suggested, glancing at his brother. "It would give her purpose, and it would allow the staff to see her as more than just a rumor." Ronan considered this for a long moment, his eyes studying Alara, as if trying to solve a puzzle he did not yet understand. "Fine," he said at last. "She may work in the infirmary, under supervision, but she does not leave the castle grounds without an escort." Alara felt a small flicker of relief. At least she would have something to occupy her hands and her mind, rather than sitting alone in a tower room counting the hours. "Thank you," she said, meaning it. The meeting ended shortly after, and Alara was led toward the infirmary wing by one of the castle guards, a stern, but not unkind man named Bram. The infirmary was a long room filled with rows of beds, most empty, a few occupied by soldiers recovering from training injuries. The head physician, an older woman named Giselle, looked up as Alara entered, her expression skeptical. "So you're the one," Giselle said, setting down the bandages she had been rolling. "The accidental queen." "I am not a queen," Alara said quickly. "Just someone who wants to help, if you'll let me." Giselle studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward a nearby table covered with jars of dried herbs. "Prove it then. Tell me what each of these does." Alara stepped forward and began identifying the herbs one by one, explaining their uses for fever, for pain, for wound care, drawing on years of lessons from her father. As she spoke, she noticed Giselle's skeptical expression softening slightly, replaced by something closer to genuine interest. "Not bad," Giselle admitted when Alara finished. "Your father taught you well. Come, there's a soldier in the third bed who took a nasty gash during training this morning. Let's see if your hands are as good as your knowledge." For the first time since the ceremony, Alara felt something like normal life returning to her, even if only for a few hours. She cleaned and stitched the wound carefully, her hands steady despite the exhaustion still weighing on her from the sleepless night before. The soldier, a young man named Corin, thanked her with a grateful smile that made her feel, briefly, like a person again, rather than a scandal, whispered about in every corner of the castle. As the day wore on, Alara lost herself in the familiar rhythm of healing work, grateful for the distraction. It was only when the light outside began to fade that she realized how tired she truly was, her body aching from a full day of standing and bending over patients after a night with almost no sleep. "Go rest," Giselle said, noticing her stumble slightly while cleaning a set of instruments. You did well today. Better than I expected, honestly. Bram escorted her back toward the tower, though this time, instead of the narrow room she had slept in the night before, he led her to a slightly larger chamber in a different wing, closer to the main castle. King's orders, Bram explained when she looked at him questioningly. Says it's easier to keep watch on you here. Elara did not argue. The new room was still modest, but it had a proper writing desk, a larger window, and a soft chair near the fireplace. She wondered, briefly, whether Ronan had chosen this room himself, or simply ordered it done without thought. She told herself it did not matter either way. That night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Elara sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the castle grounds. She thought about her father, about the quiet life he had wanted for her, and wondered what he would say if he could see her now, bonded to a king who wanted nothing to do with her, trapped inside walls she never chose to enter. She did not notice, in the darkness below, a tall figure standing near the courtyard wall, looking up toward her window the same way she looked out at the moon. Ronan Thorne stood there for a long while, arms crossed, his expression unreadable even to himself, wondering why sleep would not come, and why some part of him kept thinking about the calm, steady way the healer's daughter had spoken in his throne room that morning, refusing to break despite everything stacked against her. He told himself, as he had told himself the night before, that it meant nothing, that it was simple curiosity, nothing more. But as he finally turned and walked back toward his own chambers, the golden mark beneath his shirt pulsed warm against his chest, as if quietly disagreeing with every excuse he tried to give himself. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Elara worked each morning in the infirmary, earning slow but steady respect from Ysel and the soldiers she treated. In the afternoons, she was escorted back to her room, where she read what few books she could find, or practiced the small amount of writing her father had taught her. She rarely saw Ronan, and when she did, their exchanges were brief and formal, nothing more than polite necessity. Yet something was shifting, quietly, beneath the surface of their careful distance. Neither of them could have named it yet, not with any certainty, but it was there all the same, growing slowly, like a plant pushing up through cracked stone, patient and impossible to fully stop. A week passed, and the castle slowly grew used to the strange new presence within its walls. Elara had settled into a routine, rising early to work in the infirmary, spending her afternoons quietly reading in her room, and trying, as much as possible, to stay out of the way of court politics that had nothing to do with her. Still, she could not escape the whispers that followed her, or the guarded looks from nobles who saw her as an outsider who had no right to wear the bond mark of a king. One morning, as she prepared bandages in the infirmary, Ysel approached her with a strange look on her face. "The king has requested you attend him this afternoon, alone, in his private study." Elara's hands paused over the bandages. "Did he say why?" "He never says why," Ysel replied, though there was something knowing in her tone. "But you should probably go clean up. You have herb dust on your cheek." When the appointed hour arrived, Bram escorted Elara through unfamiliar hallways toward a part of the castle she had never visited before. The private study was smaller than the throne room, warmer somehow, with shelves lined with books and maps, a large wooden desk covered in scrolls, and a fireplace crackling softly in the corner. Ronan stood near the window, his back to the door, when she entered. "You wanted to see me, Your Grace?" she asked, standing carefully near the entrance. He turned, and for a moment, something in his expression seemed almost hesitant, though it vanished quickly, replaced by his usual composed mask. "I have been told you are doing well in the infirmary. Ysel does not offer praise easily, and yet she has had several good things to say about your work." Elara blinked, surprised. "I am glad to be useful, Your Grace." "Ronan," he said suddenly. "You may call me Ronan when we are not in formal settings. Given our situation, the titles seem somewhat pointless between us." It was such a small thing, and yet it caught her off guard. "Ronan," she repeated carefully, testing the name. "Thank you." He gestured toward a chair near the fireplace, and she sat, though she remained tense, unsure why he had truly called her here. He took the chair across from her, studying her for a long moment before speaking again. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, the words seeming to cost him some effort. "The night of the ceremony, I treated you as though you had done this deliberately, as some scheme to gain power. I have since learned enough of your character to know that was unfair." Ilara's chest tightened with something unexpected, relief mixed with surprise. Thank you for saying that. I understand why you were angry. It must have felt like your entire life was upended in a single moment. It was, he admitted. But that was not your fault. My anger was misplaced, and I regret how I handled things that first night, locking you away like a criminal, rather than treating you with any decency. You were protecting your kingdom, she said quietly. I understand that better than you might think. My father always said fear makes people do things they later regret. It does not make them bad people. Ronan studied her carefully, something shifting behind his stormy eyes. You are remarkably understanding, for someone whose life was so thoroughly disrupted by my kingdom's traditions. What choice do I have? She said with a small, tired smile. Anger will not undo the bond. I would rather find some way to live with it peacefully than spend the rest of my days fighting something I cannot change. They sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Ronan finally spoke again, his voice quieter than before. The physicians have found nothing. No way to break the bond safely. I want you to know, I have not stopped searching, but I no longer believe it is likely to happen soon, if ever. Ilara nodded slowly, absorbing this. Then I suppose we must find some way to make this arrangement bearable, for both our sakes. I would like that, Ronan said, and there was something in his tone that surprised her, an honesty that had not been present in their earlier, more formal exchanges. Over the following days, their meetings became slightly more frequent, though still careful and measured. Ronan would sometimes find reasons to walk through the infirmary during his rounds of the castle, pausing to ask Ilara about her work, or occasionally, about herself. She learned that he had lost his mother young, that his father had ruled with an iron fist, born from fear rather than confidence, and that Ronan had spent most of his life believing that closeness to anyone was a weakness enemies could exploit. In turn, she found herself sharing small pieces of her own life. The years spent learning healing at her father's side, the quiet grief of losing him, the difficulty of living under Della's cold, calculating care afterward. Neither of them spoke of the bond directly during these conversations, as if by unspoken agreement they were simply two people slowly getting to know each other, separate from the golden mark that had tied their fates together against their will. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the ceremony, a commotion arose near the castle gates. Ilara was walking back from the infirmary when she heard raised voices and the clatter of hooves on stone. She hurried toward the courtyard, curiosity overtaking caution, and found a group of soldiers gathered around a wounded messenger who had just arrived, breathless and pale, clutching a sealed letter. For the king, the messenger gasped, urgent, from the northern border. Ilara watched as guards rushed the messenger toward the throne room, and something cold settled in her stomach. She did not yet understand what the message contained, but the tension rippling through the courtyard told her it was nothing good. Later that evening, Fenna found her in her room, her usually cheerful face drawn with worry. There is talk among the guards, she whispered. Alpha Draven, from the northern pack, has been making moves near the border. Some say he means to test the king's strength, now that word of the accidental bond has spread across the kingdom. Ilara's stomach twisted further. Because of me. Not because of you, Fenna said quickly. Because of what some see as weakness. It is not fair, but that is how these things work. Rival packs look for any excuse, and an unexpected bond with someone outside noble bloodlines gives them exactly that. Ilara spent that night pacing her small room, unable to settle, her mind spinning with worry. She thought of the quiet conversations she had shared with Ronan over the past days, the small trust that had begun to build between them, and wondered whether all of it was now at risk because of politics and power struggles that had nothing to do with either of them personally, and yet everything to do with the mark on her wrist. The next morning, she was summoned once again to Ronan's private study, though this time, the atmosphere felt entirely different. He stood near his desk, several maps spread before him, his expression grim and focused in a way she had not seen since the night of the ceremony. Alpha Draven has grown bold, he said without preamble, once she entered. He sees our bond as a weakness to exploit, a chance to challenge my authority, while the kingdom is still adjusting to unexpected news. He has moved troops near the northern border, though he claims it is only a routine patrol. What will you do? Ilara asked quietly. I do not yet know, Ronan admitted, and something in his willingness to be honest with her, rather than dismissive, struck her deeply. But I want you to understand the danger clearly. If Draven decides to act, you may become a target, not because of who you are, but because of what you represent to him, an opportunity to weaken me. Alara felt fear coil in her stomach, but beneath it, something steadier as well, a resolve she did not fully expect from herself. Then I will not hide from it, she said. Whatever this bond has made me, accidental or not, I will not cower, simply because someone else decided to see me as a target. Ronan studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his eyes. I believe you, he said quietly, which is more than I can say for most people who claim such bravery. As the days passed, the tension along the northern border continued to grow, and the castle itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Alara continued her work in the infirmary, continued her quiet conversations with Ronan, and continued to feel, despite everything, a strange and unexpected sense of belonging, beginning to take root within the very walls that had first felt like a prison to her. Yet she also could not shake the growing feeling that whatever peace they were slowly building together was fragile, and that the coming days would test it in ways neither of them could fully prepare for. Della Voss arrived at the castle gates on a gray morning, demanding an audience with the king. Word reached Alara through Fenna before the guards even had time to escort the woman inside, and Alara felt her stomach drop at the news. She had not seen her stepmother since the night of the ceremony, and she had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that their paths might not cross again for a long while. She says she has urgent business regarding the bond, Fenna reported, out of breath from rushing to deliver the news. The king has agreed to see her, and he has requested that you be present as well. Alara smoothed down her dress with trembling hands, trying to steady herself before walking toward the throne room. Whatever Della wanted, it would not be simple, and it would not be for Alara's benefit. Della had never done anything in her life that did not serve her own interests first. When Alara entered the throne room, Della was already there, standing before the throne with a posture of practiced humility that Alara knew was entirely false. Della had spent years perfecting the art of appearing harmless, while calculating every possible advantage behind her calm expression. Your Grace, Della said, bowing low. Thank you for granting me this audience. I have come because I believe there is something you deserve to know about the night of the choosing ceremony. Ronan sat forward slightly on his throne, his expression carefully neutral, though Alara could see the tension in his jaw. Speak plainly, he said. Della glanced briefly at Alara before continuing. The mistake that night was not entirely an accident, Your Grace. I pushed Alara through the crowd, hoping to secure a match with Prince Kael, for the sake of our family's standing. In my eagerness, I may have caused her to lose her footing at the crucial moment. She paused, letting the words settle. I never intended for her to bond with you specifically, but I must admit, my own actions likely contributed to what happened. The room fell silent. Alara felt heat rush to her face, a mixture of humiliation and confusion. She had not known this, not for certain, though some part of her had always suspected Della's rough handling that night had played some role in her stumble. Why tell me this now? Ronan asked, his voice carefully controlled, though Alara could sense the anger simmering beneath the surface. Because I believe honesty serves everyone best in the long run, Della said smoothly. And because I hoped, given the circumstances, that Your Grace might see fit to offer some compensation to our family, given the disruption this has caused to our original plans, and given that my stepdaughter now occupies a position she was never prepared for. There it was, the true reason behind Della's sudden honesty. Alara felt a bitter mixture of anger and exhausted familiarity settle over her. Of course this was about money, about advantage, about squeezing whatever benefit could be found from a situation Della had helped create. You are asking me to pay you, Ronan said slowly, for the privilege of having caused this entire situation. Della's composed expression flickered slightly at his tone. I would not phrase it so bluntly, Your Grace, but... I understand precisely how you would phrase it, Ronan interrupted, rising from his throne. You manipulated a young woman during a sacred ceremony, contributed to an outcome that has caused significant difficulty for both her and my kingdom, and now you stand before me, expecting reward for admitting to your own interference. Della's face paled slightly, though she tried to maintain her composure. I only sought to help my family, Your Grace. Surely you understand the pressures of... I understand deception when I hear it, Ronan said coldly. You will leave my castle, and you will not return unless summoned. Consider yourself fortunate that I do not pursue further consequences for your actions that night. Della opened her mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She turned instead toward Elara, her expression shifting into something colder, more familiar to Elara from years of living under her care. You always did land on your feet, one way or another, she said quietly, before turning and walking briskly from the throne room, her heels clicking sharply against the stone floor. The silence that followed felt heavy, uncomfortable. Elara stood frozen near the entrance, processing everything she had just heard, feeling as though the ground beneath her had shifted once again. Elara, Ronan said gently, and something in the softness of his voice pulled her attention back to him. Are you all right? She realized, distantly, that tears had begun sliding down her cheeks without her noticing. I did not know, she said quietly. I always wondered if she pushed me that night, but I never knew for certain. It changes things, somehow, knowing it was not entirely my own clumsiness that caused all of this. Ronan stepped down from the throne and crossed the room toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. It does not change how I feel about the situation now, he said carefully. Whatever caused that moment in the ceremony, the bond itself chose you. Whatever her intentions, the outcome was not something either of us could have controlled. Elara wiped at her eyes, embarrassed by her tears in front of him. I am sorry. I did not mean to become emotional in front of you. You have nothing to apologize for, Ronan said, and there was a gentleness in his tone she had not expected. You have endured more in these past weeks than most people endure in years, and you have done so with more grace than I likely would have shown in your position. They stood together in the quiet throne room for a long moment, the tension of Della's visit slowly dissipating between them. Elara found herself studying Ronan's face, noticing details she had not allowed herself to notice before. The small scar near his eyebrow, the way his expression softened slightly when he was not actively guarding it, the quiet strength in the way he carried himself even in moments of uncertainty. Thank you, she said finally, for not believing whatever schemes she implied. I have come to know you these past weeks, Ronan said simply. Whatever mistakes brought us together, I do not believe deception was ever part of your nature. That evening, unable to sleep, Elara found herself walking through the quiet castle gardens, the cool night air helping to settle the storm of emotions Della's visit had stirred within her. She was surprised, though perhaps she should not have been, to find Ronan there as well, sitting alone on a stone bench near a small fountain, staring up at the stars. May I join you? She asked quietly. He looked up, something like relief flickering across his features. Please. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his presence but careful to maintain a respectful distance. For a long while, neither of them spoke, simply enjoying the quiet stillness of the garden at night, the soft sound of water trickling in the fountain, the distant call of an owl somewhere in the trees. I have spent most of my life believing that closeness to anyone was dangerous, Ronan said eventually, breaking the silence. My father's mate was used against him by enemies who understood that love could be exploited as easily as any weapon. I watched what that did to him, the fear it instilled, the way he became harder and colder as a result. I promised myself I would never allow anyone that kind of power over me. Elara listened quietly, sensing that he needed to say these words as much as she needed to hear them. And yet, he continued, these past weeks, despite everything, despite the chaos this bond has caused, I find myself thinking of you constantly. Wondering how your day went, whether you are safe, whether you are happy. It frightens me, how quickly that has happened. Elara's heart pounded in her chest. It frightens me too, she admitted quietly. I never expected any of this. Not the bond, not this closeness, not the way I feel when you speak to me so honestly. Ronan turned to look at her fully then, his stormy eyes searching hers in the moonlight. What do you feel? He asked quietly. Elara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Safe, she said finally. Understood. In a way I did not expect from someone I met under such strange circumstances. And curious about what this could become, if given the chance. Something shifted in Ronan's expression, a softening that transformed his usually guarded features into something almost vulnerable. I would like the chance to find out, he said quietly, if you are willing. Elara felt warmth spread through her chest, chasing away the last remnants of the day's earlier turmoil. "I am willing," she said softly, "to see where this leads us." They sat together beneath the stars for a long while after that, the silence between them no longer tense but comfortable, filled with unspoken possibility. Neither of them knew what challenges still lay ahead: the rising tension with Alpha Draven, the doubts of a court still uncertain about their unexpected queen, the weight of a kingdom watching to see whether this accidental bond would prove strength or weakness. But for that quiet moment in the garden, none of that mattered as much as the simple, growing warmth between two people who had never intended to find each other, and yet somehow had. 3 days after the garden conversation, a horn sounded from the castle watchtower, sharp and urgent, cutting through the morning quiet like a blade. Elara had just arrived at the infirmary when Bram burst through the doors, his face tense. "Alpha Draven's forces have been spotted crossing the northern border," he said. "The king has called an emergency council. He wants you present as well." Elara's hands stilled over the bandages she had been preparing. "Me? Why would he want me in a war council?" "I only deliver messages," Bram said, though something in his tone suggested he had his own theories. Best not keep him waiting. The council chamber was tense when Elara arrived, filled with generals and advisors poring over maps spread across a long wooden table. Ronan stood at the head of the table, his expression hard and focused, every trace of the gentle man from the garden replaced by the calculating leader his kingdom needed in this moment. "Draven claims this is a routine border patrol," one of the generals was saying as Elara entered, "but the numbers suggest otherwise. Nearly 200 soldiers, moving toward the summit grounds where the autumn diplomatic gathering is set to take place in 3 days. He means to make a statement," another advisor said grimly, "testing whether the accidental bond has weakened our king's standing among the packs." Ronan's eyes flicked toward Elara as she entered, something unreadable passing across his features before he addressed the room again. "The summit cannot be cancelled without appearing weak, which is exactly what Draven wants. We proceed as planned, but with increased security." "Your Grace," one advisor said carefully, "given the circumstances, perhaps it would be wise to leave the Queen behind, for her own safety." "No," Elara said before Ronan could respond, surprising even herself with the firmness in her voice. Every eye in the room turned toward her. "If Draven means to use my presence as proof of weakness, then hiding me away only confirms his narrative. I would rather stand beside my king and prove that this bond, however it began, is not something to be exploited." Ronan studied her for a long moment, something like pride flickering behind his stormy eyes. "She is right," he said finally. "Elara will attend the summit, under close guard, alongside the rest of our delegation." The following days passed in a blur of preparation, strategy meetings, and careful planning. Elara found herself drawn deeper into conversations with Ronan's advisors, offering what insight she could from her position as an outsider who understood, perhaps better than most, what it felt like to be underestimated by those who assumed appearances told the whole story. The morning of the summit arrived cold and overcast, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. The gathering took place on neutral ground between the northern and southern territories, a wide grassy field bordered by ancient oak trees, with pavilions set up for each visiting delegation. Ronan's party arrived with a modest but well-trained guard, enough to project strength without appearing to expect open conflict. Alpha Draven arrived shortly after, a tall, broad-shouldered man with cold eyes and a calculating smile that reminded Elara uncomfortably of Della. His entourage was larger than expected, and something about the way his soldiers positioned themselves around the field made the hair on the back of Elara's neck stand up. "Alpha King Ronan," Draven said smoothly, as the two leaders approached each other for the formal greeting. "And this must be your unexpected queen." His eyes swept over Elara with obvious skepticism. "I confess, I did not expect the great Alpha King to bond with someone so ordinary." "Appearances have never determined strength," Ronan replied evenly, though Elara could sense the tension coiled beneath his calm exterior. The formal proceedings began shortly after, delegates from various packs discussing trade agreements, border disputes, and territorial boundaries that had long been sources of tension across the kingdom. Elara sat quietly beside Ronan, observing, listening, trying to understand the complex web of politics she had found herself unexpectedly tangled within. It was during a brief recess, as delegates mingled and refreshments were served, that the trouble began. Alara had stepped away toward the edge of the gathering to clear her head, accompanied by a single guard, when she heard a commotion erupt near the main pavilion. Shouts rang out, followed by the unmistakable clash of weapons. "Stay behind me," her guard said urgently, positioning himself protectively, but chaos was already spreading through the gathering. Draven's soldiers, it seemed, had used the recess as an opportunity to stage a coordinated strike, targeting key members of Ronan's delegation, in what could only be described as an attempt to destabilize his rule through violence, disguised as an accident. Alara's training as a healer kicked in almost immediately, overriding her fear. She saw a soldier fall nearby, clutching a wound to his side, and without thinking, rushed toward him despite her guard's protests. "I can help him," she said firmly, already tearing strips from her own dress to use as a makeshift bandage. "Cover me." The battle around them was chaotic, soldiers clashing in confused knots across the field, as Ronan's guard fought to contain the sudden ambush. Alara worked quickly, applying pressure to the wound, calling out instructions to nearby soldiers about how to safely move the injured man toward the pavilion, where more supplies were kept. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, even as her heart pounded with fear, years of her father's training guiding her through the panic. Across the field, Ronan fought alongside his personal guard, his movements swift and precise, honed by years of training and the harsh lessons of ruling a kingdom that demanded strength above all else. But even as he fought, his eyes kept searching the chaos for any sign of Alara, fear for her safety cutting through him sharper than any blade. He found her eventually, kneeling beside a wounded soldier near the pavilion, her dress torn and stained, her face streaked with dirt, but her hands steady, as she worked to save a life. Something fierce and protective surged through him at the sight, and he fought his way toward her with renewed urgency, cutting down anyone who stood in his path. "Alara," he called out as he finally reached her, relief washing over his features despite the ongoing chaos around them. "Are you hurt?" "I am fine," she said quickly, not looking up from her work. "But he needs more than I can give him here. We need to get him to proper care." Ronan helped lift the wounded soldier, and together with several guards, they began fighting their way back towards safety, as the battle gradually turned in their favor. Draven's forces retreating, as reinforcements arrived from the southern territories, alerted by the commotion. By the time the fighting finally ceased, the field was littered with signs of struggle, though thankfully, the casualties were fewer than they might have been, due in large part to Alara's quick intervention with several of the wounded. Draven himself had fled the scene before he could be captured, though his soldiers left behind made it clear this had been no accident, but a deliberate attempt to weaken Ronan's standing through violence. That evening, back at the castle, Ronan found Alara in the infirmary, still tending to the wounded who had been brought back for further care, her exhaustion evident, but her dedication unwavering. He watched her for a long moment from the doorway before she noticed him. "You should be resting," he said softly. "So should you," she replied, managing a tired smile, despite everything. "But there is still work to be done." He crossed the room and gently took her hands, examining the small cuts and bruises that had accumulated during the chaos of the day. "You could have been killed today," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "When I could not find you in that chaos, I have never felt fear like that in my life." Alara looked up at him, surprised by the raw honesty in his voice. "I was afraid too," she admitted. "But I could not simply hide while people needed help. It is not who I am." "I know," Ronan said, something like wonder in his expression. "And that is precisely why I could not stop thinking about you, even in the middle of that battle. This bond, whatever mistake brought it into existence, has given me something I never expected to find. Someone who faces danger not with fear alone, but with courage and purpose." Alara felt her heart swell with emotions she had been trying to carefully guard against, afraid of hoping for too much given the strange circumstances that had brought them together. "Ronan," she said quietly, "I think I am beginning to understand what this bond truly means, beyond the magic that created it." He reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face, his touch surprisingly tender, for a man known throughout the kingdom for his ruthless strength. "What does it mean?" he asked softly. "That perhaps," she said. Some mistakes are simply fate, finding a way to give us exactly what we need, even when we do not know we need it. The infirmary around them faded into background noise as they stood together, closer now than they had ever allowed themselves to be, the events of the day stripping away the last remnants of careful distance they had maintained since that first chaotic night at the choosing ceremony. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever danger Draven still posed to the kingdom, in that quiet moment, surrounded by the aftermath of battle, something had solidified between them, that neither violence nor politics would easily break apart again. In the days following the attack at the summit, the castle buzzed with a new kind of energy, one built from urgency, rather than idle curiosity. Ronan called his council together each morning, poring over reports from scouts along the northern border, trying to determine Draven's next move. Elara, though not formally part of these meetings, found herself increasingly included, her steady presence and clear thinking earning quiet respect from advisors who had once dismissed her as an unfortunate accident. It was during one such meeting, as maps were spread across the table and voices rose with disagreement over strategy, that an idea began forming in Elara's mind, one she was hesitant to share given her position, but one that felt too important to keep silent. "If I may," she said carefully, waiting for the room to quiet before continuing. "Draven's entire strategy relies on convincing other packs that this bond represents weakness. But what if, instead of hiding from that narrative, we confronted it directly? A public declaration, formalizing our bond not as an accident to be tolerated, but as a union claimed with full intention and strength." The room fell silent, several advisors exchanging glances. Ronan studied her carefully from his seat at the head of the table. "Explain further," he said. "Right now," Elara continued, gaining confidence as she spoke, "every pack that hears of us sees uncertainty. A king who has not fully accepted his own bond, a queen with no formal standing, beyond the magic that connected us. If Ronan were to publicly and ceremonially claim me, not simply as fate's accident, but as his chosen queen, it would remove the very weakness Draven is trying to exploit." "A formal claiming ceremony," one of the older advisors mused, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "It has not been done in generations, not since the old wars, but the tradition still exists in our records. It would send a clear message to every pack watching." Ronan remained quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful as he considered the proposal. Finally he spoke. "It is a bold suggestion, and it would mean removing any final possibility of dissolving the bond, formally and publicly binding our fates together, beyond what the ceremony alone accomplished." "I understand the weight of that," Elara said quietly, meeting his eyes directly. "But I believe it is the right path forward, both for the kingdom and for us." After the council meeting concluded, Ronan asked Elara to remain behind, the room slowly emptying until only the two of them were left standing near the long table covered in maps and reports. "You surprised me today," he said once they were alone. "That was a clever strategy, one that serves the kingdom well. But I need to know, it is not merely strategy for you. I need to know that if we proceed with a formal claiming, it comes from genuine desire, not simply political necessity." Elara stepped closer to him, her heart pounding, but her resolve steady. "Ronan, these past weeks have taught me many things I never expected to learn, about strength, about courage, about what it truly means to choose someone, rather than simply having them chosen for you by fate alone. I am not suggesting this ceremony purely for political advantage. I am suggesting it because I want to choose you, fully and completely, not because a bond forced my hand that first night, but because of everything I have come to know about you since." Something in Ronan's carefully guarded expression finally broke completely, replaced by an openness she had rarely seen from him. He crossed the remaining distance between them and gently took her hands in his. "I need you to understand something as well," he said quietly. "My fear of bonding never came from doubting whether I could love someone. It came from watching love be used as a weapon against my father, watching it destroy him slowly over years. I built walls to protect myself from that same fate. But you, Elara, have found ways through every single one of those walls, not through force, but through patience and honesty I never expected to find in anyone." Tears gathered in Elara's eyes, though this time they came from something far different than the fear and confusion of that first night in the tower. "Then let us do this," she said softly. "Let us claim each other, fully and intentionally, and show this kingdom, and Draven, that what began as an accident has become something far stronger than either of us could have imagined. The formal claiming ceremony was announced throughout the kingdom within days, drawing considerable attention from every corner of Vaymor and beyond. Preparations began immediately, the castle transformed with banners and decorations, while messengers rode out to invite representatives from allied pacts to witness the event. Kael, who had watched the growing bond between his brother and Alara with quiet acceptance over the preceding weeks, approached Alara privately during the preparations, finding her in the garden where she often retreated for quiet moments of reflection. "I wanted to speak with you before the ceremony," he said, settling onto the bench beside her. "I will admit, in the beginning, there was some part of me that mourned what might have been between us, had fate chosen differently that night." Alara nodded, understanding his honesty and appreciating it. "I am sorry for the confusion that first night caused you as well, Kael. None of this was meant to happen the way it did. I have come to believe," Kael said thoughtfully, "that fate rarely makes true mistakes, even when it appears chaotic in the moment. Watching you these past weeks, watching how you have changed my brother, softened him in ways I never thought possible, I understand now that this bond, however accidental its beginning, was exactly as it should be." "Thank you for saying that," Alara said, genuinely touched by his words. "Your friendship has meant more to me than you know, especially during those first difficult days." Kael smiled warmly. "You will make a fine queen, Alara. Whatever whispers followed you here initially, I believe this kingdom is fortunate that fate chose you, mistake or not." As the day of the ceremony approached, word arrived that Draven, having learned of the planned formal claiming, was gathering additional forces near the border once more, apparently determined to make one final attempt at destabilizing Ronan's rule before the ceremony could solidify the bond beyond any political challenge. Extra guards were positioned throughout the castle and surrounding grounds, and Ronan's advisors worked tirelessly to ensure the ceremony would proceed safely despite the looming threat. The morning of the ceremony arrived clear and bright, a welcome change from the gray skies that had hung over the kingdom during the weeks of tension and preparation. Alara stood in her chambers, dressed in a gown of deep blue, embroidered with silver thread, the colors of the Thorn family house, while Fenna carefully arranged her hair with practiced hands. "You look beautiful," Fenna said softly, stepping back to admire her work. "Nothing at all like the frightened girl who arrived here weeks ago." "I feel different," Alara admitted, studying her reflection in the mirror. "Stronger somehow than I ever imagined I could become." As she made her way toward the great hall where the ceremony would take place, guided by Bram and a full escort of guards, given the ongoing threat from Draven's forces, Alara felt a calm certainty settle over her, replacing the anxiety and confusion that had defined her first weeks within these castle walls. Whatever challenges still awaited, whatever threats still loomed on the horizon, she walked forward now, not as a frightened accident, but as a woman who had chosen her own path, fully and completely. The great hall was filled beyond capacity. Nobles and representatives from across the kingdom gathered to witness the formal claiming ceremony that would solidify what had begun as an unexpected error into something far more permanent and powerful. Ronan waited at the front of the hall, dressed in formal attire that emphasized his role as king, while somehow also making him look, to Alara's eyes at least, remarkably vulnerable in this moment of genuine choice rather than fate's accident. As she walked down the aisle toward him, the golden mark on her wrist began to glow softly, responding to the proximity of its counterpart on Ronan's chest, as if the bond itself recognized and celebrated this moment of deliberate, chosen commitment layered atop its original accidental foundation. The moment Alara reached the front of the great hall, the elder Marin stepped forward once more, this time not to oversee an accidental discovery, but to guide a ceremony chosen fully and deliberately by both parties involved. The murmur of the crowd faded into respectful silence as Marin raised her hands and began the ancient words of the formal claiming rite. "By blood and bond, by choice and fate, do you, Ronan Thorn, Alpha King of Vaymor, claim this woman as your true mate and queen, not by accident alone, but by full and willing intention." Ronan's eyes never left Alara's as he answered, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "I do, fully, and without reservation." Marin turned to Alara next, her expression warm despite the formality of the moment. And do you, Alara Voss, claim this man as your true mate and king, not by accident alone, but by full and willing intention? I do, Alara answered, her voice steady, despite the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her. Fully, and with a heart that has grown to choose him beyond what fate first decided. The golden marks on both their bodies flared brightly at the completion of the vows, brighter than they had during the original ceremony weeks before, as if the magic itself recognized the difference between accident and genuine choice. Light spread through the hall, warm and golden, drawing gasps of wonder from the assembled crowd who had never witnessed such a powerful response during a claiming ceremony. As the light settled and faded, Ronan reached for Alara's hands, drawing her closer. Whatever mistake brought us together, he said quietly, meant only for her ears despite the crowd surrounding them. I choose you now, completely, and I will continue choosing you every day that follows. As I choose you, Alara replied, her heart full to bursting with emotions she had never expected to feel, toward the man who had once looked at her with such fury and disbelief. The formal celebration that followed lasted long into the evening, the great hall transformed with music and feasting, representatives from allied pacts offering their congratulations and formal recognition of the newly solidified bond. Even some who had arrived skeptical of the accidental queen found themselves won over by Alara's grace and genuine warmth throughout the celebration. However, the peace of the celebration was not to last uninterrupted. Late in the evening, as the festivities began winding down, a scout burst into the hall, breathless and urgent, immediately drawing Ronan's attention away from the celebration. Your Grace, the scout gasped. Alpha Draven's forces have crossed the border in significant numbers. They march toward the castle even now, apparently unwilling to accept the formal claiming as settled matter. The joyful atmosphere of the hall shifted instantly into tense alertness, guards moving swiftly to secure the perimeter, while advisors gathered around Ronan for urgent consultation. Alara felt her earlier joy tempered by cold apprehension, though she refused to let fear overtake the strength she had discovered within herself over the preceding weeks. How much time do we have? Ronan asked the scout, his voice hard and focused, every trace of the tender bridegroom replaced by the calculating king his kingdom needed in this moment of crisis. Perhaps until dawn, Your Grace, if they maintain their current pace. Ronan turned to his assembled generals, quickly organizing defensive strategies, while guards began ushering guests toward secure areas of the castle. Alara, rather than allowing herself to be simply escorted away to safety, stepped forward with the same resolve that had carried her through the summit attack weeks before. I will help prepare the infirmary for wounded, she said firmly. If Draven means to attack tonight, there will be injuries to treat, and I do not intend to hide while others fight for this kingdom, for our kingdom. Ronan studied her for a moment, torn between his instinct to protect her and his growing respect for her determination and courage. Stay within the castle walls, he said finally, but do what you must. I trust your judgment, Alara, more than you know. The night that followed passed in tense preparation, soldiers taking their positions along the castle walls, while Alara and Yselle organized the infirmary, laying out supplies, and preparing for what they hoped would be minimal casualties, though both women understood the reality of what lay ahead. As dawn approached, the sound of distant horns signaled the arrival of Draven's forces at the castle's outer defenses. Alara stood near the infirmary window, watching the first gray light of morning illuminate the distant movement of soldiers across the fields beyond the castle walls, her heart pounding with fear for Ronan's safety, even as she tried to maintain the calm focus her healing work required. The battle that followed was fierce but relatively brief, Ronan's forces having prepared well during the night, and Draven's soldiers finding the castle's defenses far stronger than anticipated. Reports began filtering back to the infirmary throughout the morning, wounded soldiers arriving for treatment, while news of the battle's progress spread through the castle in fragments. By midday, word finally arrived that the battle had turned decisively in Ronan's favor, Draven's forces retreating in disarray after failing to breach the castle's outer defenses, their leader himself captured attempting to flee the field when his soldiers began surrendering en masse. Alara felt relief flood through her at the news, though she continued working tirelessly alongside Yselle to treat the wounded who continued arriving throughout the afternoon. It was near evening when Ronan finally appeared at the infirmary doors, exhausted and bearing minor injuries of his own, but alive and largely unharmed. Alara rushed toward him the moment she saw him, relief overwhelming every careful composure she had maintained throughout the long day of treating wounded soldiers. "You are safe," she said, her voice thick with emotion, as she examined the cut along his temple and the bruising visible on his arms. "Thanks in part to knowing you were safe here, working to help those who needed it," Ronan said, gently cupping her face despite his exhaustion. "Draven has been captured. His forces have surrendered. This threat, at least, is finally over." Relief and exhaustion combined to overwhelm Alara completely, and she found herself crying against Ronan's shoulder, the accumulated stress of the past days finally breaking free now that the immediate danger had passed. Ronan held her close, murmuring quiet reassurances, his own relief evident in the way he refused to release his hold on her even as other soldiers and staff moved around them within the busy infirmary. That night, as the castle slowly settled from the chaos of battle into quiet recovery, Ronan and Alara sat together in his private study, both physically and emotionally exhausted, but finding comfort in each other's presence after the trials of the day. "What will happen to Draven?" Alara asked quietly, curled beside Ronan near the fireplace. "He will face judgment for his aggression, according to the laws that govern relations between the packs," Ronan replied. "But his defeat, and the failure of his attempt to exploit our bond as weakness, should discourage similar attempts from other packs, who might have considered testing us in the future." "Then perhaps," Alara said softly, "something good has come, even from this terrible day. Proof, undeniable proof, that this bond, whatever its origins, has only made us stronger, not weaker as Draven hoped." Ronan pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his exhaustion evident, but his contentment equally clear. "You have made me stronger, Alara, in ways I never expected when that mark first appeared between us. I am grateful, more than I could ever properly express, for the mistake that brought you into my life." As they sat together in comfortable silence, the fire crackling softly before them, both understood that while immediate danger had passed, there remained work still to be done, healing to continue both physically for the wounded, and emotionally, within a kingdom still adjusting to its unexpected but increasingly beloved new queen. But for tonight, exhausted and safe within each other's presence, they allowed themselves simply to rest, grateful for survival, and for the unexpected bond that had brought them together, against every original intention or plan. In the weeks that followed the defeat of Draven's forces, the kingdom of Vaymor slowly settled into a period of recovery and rebuilding. Wounded soldiers healed under Alara's continued care in the infirmary. Damaged sections of the outer castle walls were repaired, and the political tension that had gripped the court since the night of the choosing ceremony gradually eased into something resembling peace. Yet despite the outward calm, Alara found herself increasingly troubled by something she could not quite name, a restlessness that lingered beneath the surface of her daily routine. She spent her mornings in the infirmary as always, her afternoons occasionally assisting with matters of court now that her position as queen had been formally recognized, and her evenings with Ronan, their bond deepening steadily with each passing day. And yet something still felt unfinished between them, some final wall neither had fully addressed. It was Yselle, perceptive as always despite her gruff exterior, who finally addressed the matter directly one afternoon, as they worked together preparing medicines for the infirmary stores. "You have been distracted these past days," the older woman observed, not looking up from the herbs she was carefully measuring. "Something troubles you." Alara considered denying it, then decided against the pretense. "I do not know how to explain it," she admitted. "Ronan and I have grown closer than I ever imagined possible, especially given how this all began. But there remains something guarded in him still, some part he has not fully shared with me, even now." Yselle nodded slowly, setting down her measuring tools. "Kings are taught from birth to guard themselves, to reveal only what serves their position. Even in matters of the heart, that training runs deep. Perhaps he needs to be shown it is safe to set that guard aside completely, not simply lowered partially, as he has done so far." Alara turned Yselle's words over in her mind throughout the remainder of the day, and that evening, as she and Ronan sat together in the garden where their relationship had first truly begun to deepen, weeks before, she decided to address the matter directly, rather than continuing to wonder in silence. "Ronan," she said quietly, watching the moonlight play across the fountain's rippling water, "I need to ask you something, And I need you to answer honestly, even if the answer is difficult." He turned to face her fully, his expression attentive despite the weariness of another long day of governing a kingdom, still recovering from conflict. "Of course, anything. When we speak of your father, of what happened to his mate, you always stop just short of the full story," Elara said carefully. "I have noticed it several times now. There is something you have not told me, something that still weighs on you even now." Ronan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the fountain, as old memories clearly surfaced within him. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower and more vulnerable than Elara had ever heard it before. "My mother was not simply used as leverage against my father, as I have told you. She was killed, deliberately, by an enemy pack seeking to weaken his rule through his grief. I was 7 years old when it happened. I remember very little of her directly, only fragments, but I remember clearly the transformation in my father afterward. He became cold, distant, ruthless, in ways he had never been before her death. He taught me, through his own broken example, that love was not merely a vulnerability, but potentially a death sentence for anyone I cared for." Elara felt her heart ache at the pain still evident in his voice, even years removed from the tragedy itself. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I did not know the full truth of it." "I have never told anyone the complete story," Ronan admitted. "Not even Kale knows every detail, though he lived through the aftermath alongside me. I have carried this fear my entire life, that loving someone fully, completely, without reservation, invites the same tragedy that destroyed my father. When the bond first formed between us, my anger was not merely about disrupted plans or political inconvenience. It was fear, pure and simple. Fear that history might repeat itself, that caring for you might eventually lead to losing you the same way my father lost my mother." Tears gathered in Elara's eyes as she absorbed the depth of pain he had carried silently for so many years. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "I understand now why you fought so hard against this bond initially, why full vulnerability has been so difficult for you, even as we have grown closer." "I am trying," Ronan said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to display so openly. "Every day, I am trying to set aside those old fears, to trust that what we have found together is worth the risk my father's tragedy taught me to avoid. You have shown me courage I did not know I lacked, until I watched you demonstrate it repeatedly, facing danger without hesitation, choosing honesty, even when silence would have been easier." Elara squeezed his hand gently, feeling the walls between them finally crumbling completely, replaced by a closeness built on genuine understanding, rather than careful, guarded affection. "I have my own fears as well," she admitted. "Growing up, after my father died, Della made certain I understood that I was never truly wanted, never truly chosen for myself alone, only useful for whatever advantage I might provide her. Even now, some part of me still fears that this bond, however deeply it has grown between us, exists because fate forced your hand, rather than because you would have chosen me freely, given every option available to you." Ronan turned to face her fully, cupping her face gently in his hands, his stormy eyes filled with an intensity that left no room for doubt. "Elara, I have had every opportunity these past weeks to end this bond, to seek other options, to distance myself from what began as an unwanted accident. Instead, I chose you, publicly and formally, in front of my entire kingdom. I choose you every single day since, not because fate demands it, but because I have come to understand that you are precisely the partner I need, the queen this kingdom deserves, and the person my heart has chosen freely, regardless of how our paths first crossed." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability he had finally allowed himself to fully display, broke through the last remaining doubts Elara had carried since that chaotic night of the choosing ceremony. She leaned into his touch, feeling a completeness settle over her that she had never experienced before, not even during the earlier moments of their growing closeness. "I love you," she said softly, the words emerging naturally, without hesitation or fear, for the first time since their unexpected bond had begun. "Not because of the magic that first connected us, but because of everything I have learned about who you truly are, beneath the crown, and the careful walls you built to protect yourself." "I love you as well," Ronan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "More completely than I ever believed myself capable of feeling for anyone, given everything my father's tragedy taught me to fear. You have shown me that love does not have to be a weakness exploited by enemies. It can be a strength, a source of courage rather than vulnerability, when built on the kind of trust and honesty we have found together." They remained together in the garden long into the night, sharing stories from their childhoods, fears they had carried silently for years, and hopes for the future they were slowly building together, despite its unconventional beginning. The moonlight bathed the garden in soft silver light, and for the first time since the chaos of the choosing ceremony had first brought them together, both Alara and Ronan felt entirely at peace. Their remaining walls finally dissolved completely, replaced by a bond built on genuine love rather than mere accident or political necessity. As dawn approached and they finally made their way back toward the castle, hand in hand, neither could have predicted the challenges that might still lie ahead in ruling a kingdom together, in building a life neither had originally planned for themselves. But whatever came next, they faced it now, not as two strangers bound unwillingly by ancient magic, but as true partners who had chosen each other completely, with open hearts and honest understanding, finally achieved after weeks of careful, patient growth. Autumn had fully settled over Vaymor by the time preparations began for Alara's official coronation as queen, the leaves along the castle grounds turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson that matched, fittingly, the mark still visible on her wrist whenever the light caught it just right. The kingdom had spent the preceding weeks healing from the conflict with Draven's forces, trade routes reopening, allied pacts sending formal congratulations for the successful defense of the realm, and daily life gradually returning to its normal rhythms. Draven himself had been formally judged by a council of neighboring pack leaders, stripped of his territory and authority as punishment for his unprovoked aggression, his lands redistributed among more peaceful neighboring packs, who had long suffered under his aggressive posturing. The threat that had loomed over Alara and Ronan's early days together had finally been resolved, allowing the kingdom to move forward, without that particular shadow hanging over its future. Alara stood in her chambers on the morning of her coronation, watching as Fenna carefully arranged the final touches of her elaborate gown, deep blue silk, embroidered with silver thread, that caught the morning light streaming through her window. The nervous 19-year-old who had stumbled into the wrong place during the choosing ceremony felt like a distant memory now, replaced by someone far more confident, secure in her place within the kingdom, and within Ronan's heart. "You seem calm," Fenna observed, smiling as she finished the final adjustments to Alara's hair. "I remember how frightened you were the morning after the ceremony, all those months ago." "I was terrified then," Alara admitted, studying her reflection thoughtfully. "But so much has changed since that night. But I have learned that I belong here, not because fate forced a mistake upon me, but because I have earned my place through everything that followed." A soft knock interrupted their conversation, and Kale entered, dressed formally for the occasion, a warm smile on his face as he took in Alara's appearance. "You look every bit the queen this kingdom needs," he said sincerely. "Ronan asked me to escort you to the ceremony, given how nervous he claims to be feeling this morning, despite facing armies and enemy packs without any visible hesitation." Alara laughed softly, touched by the image of the powerful Alpha King feeling nervous over a ceremonial coronation after facing far greater dangers without flinching. "Then let us not keep him waiting any longer than necessary." The Great Hall was even more crowded than it had been during their formal claiming ceremony months before. Representatives from every allied pack gathered to witness the official coronation of their new queen, a woman whose journey from accidental bond to beloved leader had become something of a legend already whispered throughout the kingdom and beyond its borders. Ronan waited at the front of the hall, dressed in ceremonial robes befitting his position as king, his expression a mixture of pride and open affection that would have seemed impossible to imagine during those first tense weeks following the choosing ceremony. As Alara walked down the aisle toward him, escorted by Kale, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, but rather than the fear and uncertainty that had gripped her during her first appearance before this court, she felt only steady confidence and quiet joy. Maren once again presided over the ceremony, her weathered face creased with genuine warmth as she prepared to formally crown the young woman she had watched grow from frightened accidental bride into a queen who had earned the respect and affection of an entire kingdom through her courage, compassion, and unwavering dedication to those she served. "Ilara Voss," Maren began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "You came to this kingdom through circumstances none could have predicted. An error during a sacred ceremony that bound you unexpectedly to our Alpha King. Yet in the months since that unexpected beginning, you have proven yourself time and again, through healing hands, courageous heart, and steadfast loyalty to this kingdom and its people. Do you accept the full responsibility and honor of becoming Queen of Vaymor, not merely through the bond that first connected you to our king, but through your own earned right to this position?" "I accept," Ilara said, her voice steady and clear, carrying easily through the hushed hall. "Fully, and with a heart devoted to serving this kingdom and its people, alongside the man I have come to love completely." Marin lifted the ceremonial crown, a delicate circlet of silver, adorned with small sapphires that caught the light streaming through the hall's tall windows, and placed it gently upon Ilara's head. "Then by the authority granted to me, and by the will of this kingdom's people, I formally crown you Ilara Thorn, Queen of Vaymor." The hall erupted in applause and celebration, the assembled nobles and representatives rising to their feet in genuine acknowledgement of a queen who had won their respect not through birthright or political maneuvering, but through demonstrated character and unwavering courage during the kingdom's greatest recent trial. Ronan stepped forward, taking Ilara's hands in his own, his eyes bright with an emotion he no longer felt any need to hide from his assembled court. "My queen," he said softly, meant only for her despite the crowd surrounding them. "From the first accidental moment you knelt before me, uncertain and afraid, to this moment now, watching you accept this crown with such grace and confidence, I have never been more grateful for whatever mistake first brought us together." "Nor have I," Ilara replied, smiling up at him with genuine happiness that radiated through her entire being. "Though I no longer think of it as a mistake at all. Perhaps fate simply understood, better than either of us could have at the time, exactly what we each needed." The celebration that followed lasted long into the evening, music and laughter filling the castle, as representatives from across the kingdom and its allied territories joined in genuine celebration of their new queen. Kale, watching from a nearby table with quiet contentment, found himself approached by a young noblewoman from a neighboring territory, their conversation sparking an interest that suggested his own story might yet hold unexpected happiness, still waiting to unfold. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Ronan and Ilara finally found a quiet moment alone on the castle balcony, overlooking the grounds where, months before, chaos and battle had threatened everything they were building together. Now the same grounds lay peaceful beneath a canopy of stars, the autumn air crisp but comfortable. "Do you remember?" Ronan said softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind, as they gazed out over the peaceful kingdom below. "That first night, how certain I was that this bond represented nothing but disaster and inconvenience." "I remember," Ilara said, leaning back contentedly against him. "I was equally certain my life had ended the moment I stumbled in front of you, instead of your brother." "And now?" he asked, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Now," Ilara said, turning in his arms to face him fully, "I understand that sometimes the greatest gifts arrive disguised as mistakes. What began as an error during a crowded ceremony has become the truest, most meaningful bond I could have ever imagined, built not merely on ancient magic, but on genuine love earned through honesty, courage, and unwavering choice." Ronan smiled, the guarded coldness that had once defined him, replaced entirely by open warmth, reserved now only for the woman who had transformed not just his heart, but his entire understanding of what strength truly meant. "Then let us continue building this life together," he said softly, "not because fate demanded it that chaotic night, but because we choose it, fully and completely, every single day that follows." Beneath the star-filled sky, surrounded by a kingdom finally at peace, Ilara and Ronan stood together as true partners, their unlikely beginning, transformed through patience, honesty, and genuine love, into a bond stronger than any political alliance or ancient magic could have created alone. Whatever challenges the future might bring to their reign, they would face them together, no longer as strangers accidentally bound by fate's error, but as chosen partners whose love had grown to become the very foundation of their shared future, proof that even the most unexpected beginnings could lead to the truest and most enduring happiness.